Hi, I'm Larry Baxt, the founder of Oper Germany, and today we're interviewing Lorna Price, who is both a singer and a language teacher for musicians. So we want to find out all about what she's done and what she's teaching and how it helps us get jobs in Germany. So Lorna, tell us all about your background and how you got into music and what your education has been.
So I should probably go back to the beginning, which is why I started learning German. I was a chorister in Wales growing up, and I had the choice of learning either German or Welsh at school. And because I'd sung lots of Bach, I could kind of already had a head start with being exposed to the German language. So it was an easy decision for me. I remember singing a John Passion when I was, I think, 9 or 10. So that was my first chance to really engage with the German language. And yeah, I really fell in love with it. And then I actually studied languages at university. I studied French and German. And then since then, I've been combining my freelance singing work, mostly choral work and chorus work, but a bit of oratorio and solo work, with teaching German as a second language to singers who want to start working
Well,
abroad.
now you're European, or at least the as close as the English and the Welsh are. Um, Tell us, we Americans are really ignorant about languages, so you've had a head start on us. We're starting from ground zero. Many of us even think that the particular accent that we grew up with is the way to speak English, so we don't even speak English correctly. Tell us all about um, what you studied as a kid coming up and how that's affected you now.
So, as in what I studied language wise as a child.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I started with French when I was very, very, very little. I think I was probably 5 or 6 when I started going to French club after school, which was interestingly a singing club for primary school children. So that's aged 5 to 11 in the UK. But we learnt French. I mean, I still have the songs like on loop in my head sometimes that we did in French club. It was just after school. I think my mum sent me because they wanted some free childcare and added bonus. So both my parents are orchestral musicians, and we're really keen on like developing my ear. But there's a lot to be said. Musicians make great language learners. I have to say, like the people I work with are absolutely super. They've got the pronunciation down already through singing. And they've got their ear really trained. They're really used to picking up sounds, really used to picking up phonemes. So it's a real treat to be able to work with so many musicians on a regular basis.
So
Um,
what did you study in university then?
So my course was called Modern and Medieval Languages, and I studied half French, half German. And then during my third year of university, I had to go and live in German speaking or French speaking country. They kind of like hoped that you spend the full time in one place to really kind of hone your language skills. So I specialized in German, and I spent the first 6 months of my year abroad. At the Wiener Staatsoper in Vienna as an intern, which was really fun in the press department.
Oh,
Uh,
that must have been lots of fun. You must have learned a great deal there.
it was super. I mean, it was quite an intense 6 months because when I went, my German was fine, but Austrian German is quite different.
Very different.
Yeah, so I kind of had to like recalibrate a bit. And what was really lovely as well is that it was a really international environment to be working in. So we had a lot of French conductors coming. We had conductors from Italy, from all over the world, from the States as well. So it was a really cool environment to be in. And the press department was super, super busy because the opera singers over there are treated like, well, treated really, really well, but also there's lots and lots of press opportunities for singers and collaborations with external companies. So we managed that a little bit. So I was there for 6 months.
So
Uh,
that was your time in Wien.
yeah.
And when you that was in your third year of university?
Exactly, yeah. So that was the first 6 months, and then I actually moved to Mainz after that to work in the children's music department of music publishers that's based there called Schott Music.
Oh
Uh,
yes, of course we know shot.
yeah. So I was in the children's department, mostly translating songs into English, and sometimes vice versa as well. But it was a really
Wow.
nice way to spend a learning year.
So you've really had quite a language background, starting from when you were young and really going into the actual places like Vienna and then Mainz, in the heart of Germany. And how did you get into actually performing and singing?
So in the UK, we have a big choir school system, and the school that I went to from the age of 10 was a choir school. So basically, you sing for your supper, and every day you're singing in the cathedral. And it's where the heavy, like, sight reading tradition in the UK kind of comes from, I would say. So my background's mostly choral music. And then when I was at university, I went as a choral scholar. So the whole time I was kind of doing my degree, but also singing every day in a chapel, or then you kind of pack in the concerts with your friends and groups, and then it grew from there.
Now,
um
if you sing out of tune, do they not serve you dinner?
Sometimes you had to sing at some dinners, but we were never it was we weren't served, so I don't know yet. Maybe the day.
My very first voice teacher used to say that when the chorus that Bach's chorus kids chorus when they would sing badly he wouldn't serve them dinner. So
uh,
it was a lot rougher back then. Uh, so you've been involved really from both sides for a long time, and you have that great English education and background. Um, how did that help you when you actually started performing? And what kind of performing have you been doing? Tell us about in particular your work in Germany, if at all, with choruses and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I've just got back from 2 months living in Salzburg, which has been super, in Austria again, working at the Festspiele, doing Don Giovanni and another, well, a Bach concert as well of Matthew Passion, which has been absolutely super. And then most of my work in Germany has been touring work with groups that I work with in the UK, which has been lovely. So I was a apprentice with the Monteverdi Choir last year. We did a fair bit of touring together.
This
Um,
is also these are all English groups.
yeah, exactly. And then I also do a bit of work for some Belgian groups that often tour to Germany as well. So yeah, it's kind of a mix, but it's nice.
And I hate to be crass, but I'm a tenor and an opera singer. So did you got paid for these kinds of things? I mean,
Yeah,
this is
of
these are
course,
paying
of course.
gigs.
Yeah, so it's ensemble work and choral singing work. So it's just a different a strand of, yeah.
It's great. No, I mean, work is work. A professional is professional.
Yeah.
Boris Goldovsky used to say that, I am professional. I get money. You pay me. You are amateur because you are studying. So it's, if you're getting paid, you're a professional. That's great.
Yeah. And I think the thing to remember with Germany is that, of course there's a huge operatic tradition in Germany, but also there's a massive choral scene. And there's radio choirs, scattered all over Germany, which is in part because of its history and the fact that, until, quite recently in its history, it wasn't a unified country. So there's like a huge, in the same way that there's a huge wealth of opera houses, there's also a huge wealth of radio choirs. And if you've got a skill set which is slightly different, maybe you're more used to reading music or working chorally, or like your skill set might be in sight reading, for example, why not
Absolutely.
apply for a radio choir job in Germany? And my experience of that is through deputy list and deputy work, but in the future, it's something I would absolutely love to do. And they do ask you to have a command of the German language. It's absolutely necessary, of course it is. So I think it's important to remember there's also that strand of work as well in Europe, which is there's lots and lots of work.
Absolutely, and there are many, each opera house has a chorus as well, and we know singers, and we have interviewed singers who actually started out singing in the chorus and got small solo parts and worked their way up to being, major soloists. So it's definitely a route, and it's definitely something that all singers uh, should think about, given depending on their skill set. So tell us how you integrate that with your language teaching, because you do teach, and how do you balance the two? How do you make sure that you're not touring when you're supposed to be teaching?
Well, I'm very lucky in that I think that my business model wouldn't be able to exist had COVID not happened because I do all of my teaching on Zoom. A
Uh,
couple of face-to-face students, but mostly because the people I work with are also touring. It has to be online because otherwise our diaries just wouldn't line up. And I work with singers. I've got a couple of students as well in the States, so again, that's completely different. We have to be on Zoom, and a couple of students as well who are about to move to Germany. So they're kind of supporting them through this transition phase of, starting out in the UK learning German as a foreign language, and then suddenly, from next week, they're going to be completely immersed in the German language.
well,
So
now, how do you prepare a singer for an audition tour or work in Germany?
So it depends on the student in question. So I have a combination of offers. I do group courses, which at the moment is beginner courses, but they do go up to all levels. But it's just that the group that I started with has stayed and has continued. It's a group of 10, and we meet on Tuesday mornings. They're at about A1.3 at the moment, on according to the European Common Framework of Languages, and we work by preparing them. So if you think about most offers for language learning, it's not really until you reach a very advanced stage that you could probably, start asking questions or do specialized, very, very specific vocab about musicianship, for example. Like I know of some very, very advanced courses that exist for once you've learned German, now we'll give you like an introduction to singers German or to um, music theory in German. It's seen as quite an advanced thing, but my argument is that why don't we integrate it from the start in language teaching? From the very first lesson in a A1.1 beginners class, which we do as either group or I also offer the course as one-to-one. We start, by doing, for example, lesson 3 is numbers, and we do numbers 1 to 1,000, but immediately our application of it is asking about bar numbers in rehearsals or
Right,
asking
right, exactly. That's very practical. Right.
exactly. So my training is very, very practical language training for singers. And I'm used to working with language learners of all levels through my work with the Goethe Institute. But yeah, at the moment, my group courses is sort of about A1.3.
And how do you deal with auditions? Do you have any specific audition related teaching material?
Yes, I have a short course which is adapted to the students' levels. So normally when somebody comes to me, I ask for a bit of background, or we might have a little consultation call for 15 minutes, and we work out what they need and where their language level is at. And yeah, I have basically a short lesson that I offer to students. You normally, if you're asking for this, specific thing of how do I present myself in an audition or that kind of thing, you might have some prior knowledge of German already. So it depends on the student, but we would do things like introducing yourself, talking about the 3 pieces that you are going to present. We talk about some auditions, for example, radio choirs require you to do some oral tests. So we might talk about, for example, we know how what you call a major third in German, doing some training exercises, that kind of thing. Sort of more music theory based. So it really, really depends on the client. It's a very client focused.
So you do adapt it to the particular audition needs of
Of
the.
course,
Right.
yeah. There's two sets
Excellent.
of needs, I think. There's the audition needs, and then there's the language needs, because there's such a like spectrum of abilities in in the German language. And some people come and say, oh, well, I did, 3 years of German at school, or maybe I did 1 year of German at university on the side, but I've forgotten most of it. So I might work together more closely with the student over a longer period of time on a bespoke course. Like, for example, I've got a student who's just about to move to Germany this month, and they needed to get their B2 German certificate by the time they moved. So we worked together really, really intensely over the last 6 months or so, and they've just sat their B2 exam last Saturday. So
Telling us how after you studied German and French and then did some apprenticeships in Germany and Wien, and when did you start your official certification course at the Goethe Institute, and kind of what level you are at as far as your own level of speaking in German, if you're
yeah,
fluent? Yeah.
so yeah, I can. So a good starting point to talk about would be before I left to do my internship in Germany, I had to sit a Common European Framework for Languages test given by Erasmus at the time. And before I moved to Germany as a student, I was B2, lower level B2. But when I came back before my final year of university, I'd got my C2. So that's like you're approaching near native. And then since then, so that was 6 years ago now that I came back from there, maybe 7 years ago. I then had a final year of university during which I still was improving my German language skills. And then pretty much straight after university, I started a part-time job at the Goethe Institute. Now, it wasn't as a teacher initially, it was in their outreach department. So it was promoting German in the UK. So promoting language learning at a school level originally. So we did various outreach projects, like a German through song project. We had virtual reality projects, all sorts of things. But during that time, I was still working in a German language environment. You go to the Goethe Institute and it's really amazing because, even wherever you are in the world, you sort of open the door and it's, all the push pull signs are in German, everything there. Everyone says, we be greeted in German at the front desk. So, and then COVID hit. So then I was there in the outreach department for 3 years. And then as my own singing kind of took off, like ensemble singing, and I was away a fair bit and touring, it became less compatible to have a 3-day a week job. So Goethe offered me the chance to retrain as a teacher to have a bit more flexibility. So I did their Grünes Diplom about 2 years ago now. And that's their international teaching qualification for their German teachers worldwide. So once you have that qualification, an internationally recognized qualification, you could teach at any Goethe Institute worldwide, which is quite cool. But it's also a very specific training to become a language teacher. So it's not it's quite different from learning to teach for children or learning to teach as a German language teacher at a school here, because it's an immersive approach. So the Goethe Institute's way of teaching, models the latest research and puts the latest research into practice, which is, foreign language learning should take place in the foreign language. Of course you can use English to support a little bit, but the goal is to speak as much in the foreign language, to support your students to use the language from day one, to be able to function in situations that mean something to them. So for musicians, from my perspective, because that's my background, it's like enabling students and empowering students to be able to function from day one in situations that they encounter on a regular basis. So you're looking at really specialized training and really focusing on immersion, and also focusing on empowerment in your learner. So like enabling them with confidence, supporting them to feel like they can just have a go, making an environment that's really supportive where people try.
And what location of the Goethe Institute did you study? And did you work and study, I guess,
in London.
in the Goethe Institute in London?
And how how did all your Ausbildung help function in terms of being a chorus member at the Salzburg Festspiel?
The rehearsals take place in a mixture of German and English.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yes, well, but because the cast is international, but living in Austria for 2 months, you can imagine, it's being able to interact with the costume department who might not speak any English at all. It's not, you wouldn't expect that from people who work behind the
Oh,
scenes. Being able to speak with people backstage, being able to speak to the porters. Um, I think the social side is much improved if you speak German. The contacts that you make. Some of the directors spoke only German. There's a little bit of translation going on as well. So of course, you are living in a foreign country for 2 months straight. You kind of can't really go home. I mean, you could try and go home on your 2 days off, but we're
no.
pretty exhausted. And so it makes things a lot easier. But
And
obviously,
you found you got you were quite comfortable with that with all that.
yes, yeah, yeah. It was really, really nice to be back living in Austria. I think it's a very special country and kind of feels like, I don't know. I've heard like Salzburg referred to as like kind of the Hollywood for classical musicians, kind of walk around and you're seeing all these, famous faces and so much going on as well. So I think, you really benefit from being able to speak the language.
And
Yeah.
how comfortable are you now with the language? Do you feel like it's pretty much your second language now?
Of course, yeah. So so my answer earlier was a very long-winded way to say that since university, I've had to continue my German learning process because of having these 5 years with the Goethe Institute. So firstly through, my outreach program, but then also through training as a teacher. So I have a near native level of German, even though I'm a second language speaker. Yeah, and one of the things that we are trained to do as language coaches, operating the second language and immersing, which is kind of funky, is to be able to adapt our level of spoken German to the learner's level of spoken German. So, for example, if I was dealing with a group of beginners, I wouldn't spout at them in very advanced B2, B2 level
Right.
German. I would adapt my spoken level of German to their level, and I would take into account their background knowledge of other languages. So, for
And
example, I
and
might use words they might recognize, if that makes sense.
how much grammatik did you mix in? Do you mix in with your musical immersion when you teach online?
So when I teach for my German for Musicians business, we always build in inductive grammar to the lesson. So every single lesson that we do has a grammatical purpose as well. So my aim as a teacher, we have a goal set at the beginning of every lesson. We always start with some small talk and warm-ups, then it goes to a goal. And then from that goal, we work up to being able to fulfill that goal, which is kind of a situational setting. So for example, one of the first lessons that I do with beginners is to do with introduction to der, die, das and gender. And the way that we do that is my goal in that lesson is you can describe the orchestra in German because it's a great way to introduce to nouns in German, der, die, das, and also to start, building these compound nouns. So, in German, you can stick together nouns and you've got to look at the last noun to be able to work out if it's der, die, das. So one of the first lessons we do on the surface level, it looks like we're just talking about instruments in the orchestra and do they belong to the woodwind group, brass group, putting the words together in German. But actually, what the purpose is from my side is an introduction to der, die, das and gender. And it's also an introduction to compound noun building and being able to expand your vocabulary as a learner by putting together two words or knowing where to look in the word to work out what gender it is. So
Right.
that's
Excellent. So that you're building a conceptual knowledge of the language with a practical skeleton, as it were.
exactly. And of course, the added benefit for a musician is like, well, I can now speak about very comfortably about the orchestra and its, categorization, and there's a grammatical component there. So,
And
um,
that's, if you don't mind me interjecting, that's one thing I was really curious about because I think most singers and musicians, we have to be dexterous in multiple languages. And I think a lot of singers get overwhelmed, in particular, because you're on stage and you have to sound authentic, and then you have to be able to speak in auditions and in rehearsals. And it's how to, I always say fluency is a bit relative when it comes to when you're working in multiple languages. And I'm always curious about language teachers, how, if that's teach specifically towards a certain métier or a certain career field, how you take the language that you have an expertise in and teach grammar, but also really focus on the most important aspects that a singer or a musician will use in their pragmatic everyday life, because we can't, all of us singers can't spend our entire career field on just one language. We have to be able to go in between three or four at least. And so I'm curious about, like, when did you start that kind of breakdown from once you really had a solid learning of German to kind of really focusing on the métier of musicians, and how you went about that?
Yeah, so I came from the reverse perspective. I came from a very frustrated perspective, which was that I just studied the whole language and did a degree in German before actually like having the musical application, which first started for me on my year abroad. So I'm coming from a complete other way of looking at things, which is like, why did it take me so long to learn the German that was relevant to my career? That I was 6, 7 years in before I had that learning. And there, to me, and it's interesting you're talking about fluency, even though I'd studied German for, years, I didn't have the vocabulary to be able to function in my first week at the Wiener Staatsoper in the press office. I
Hmm.
didn't have that specialist knowledge. And there's absolutely no reason why you can't build that in from the start. And it's what's useful. So I think aside from saving a lot of time, it's far more motivating to a student. And for me, the question isn't actually about fluency. Obviously, my goal is to enable people to be able to speak German confidently and to enjoy speaking the language and for it to support their career. But the question that's in my head is, can this student say what they need to say to be able to function in the situations that they regularly encounter? And that to me is kind of the first priority. Everything else, once you've built that solid basis, talking about these examples of der, die, and das, well, when you move to Germany, you're going to be in a cafe pretty regularly. And I imagine that having, had that exposition to, musical language, if we hadn't yet spoken about, ordering a coffee in German, probably have a pretty good stab at it, having had 30 weeks of beginners German. It does come up in my course as for beginners. In a very important lesson about being able to order in the pub after a concert.
It's very important, sehr wichtig. Prost, yeah.
My point is that there's you can focus for ages on thinking about the UK system of language learning. You can focus for ages being able to talk about, going shopping and that kind of thing. But actually, will it help you in an audition? Well, probably not.
That's amazing to hear that perspective, because coming from North America, I had in my training at school, we had kind of 2 years of each important language. And then when I studied German in Germany, it was a completely different system. First of all, you're not really focused as much on grammar, but it's more immersion, number one. And then number two, the teachers, at least my teachers at the school I studied at IFS in Bonn, and they really asked us, like, what is your profession? Because they really wanted us to focus on that vocabulary. And all the language that I had in the United States seemed a bit for naught in a way, which is why I always recommend either programs like the Goethe Institute if you can't get to Germany, programs that really try and mimic more the European way of language learning that is more immersion than just book study. And it seems like you've kind of taken what you learned, what through your training, what not to do, and have turned it into, what's really pragmatic, which is really admirable.
Thank you. I think for me, it's about, being able to, like, I'm thinking, for example, about like clothes is a topic that comes up loads at school, right? You're like constantly talking about my school uniform and like, what do I wear and that kind of thing. And on my mind because I've got a lesson next week about this. And we're doing adjectives and clothing. And it's about kind of finding the other side of it is that it's about um, enabling learners to see how applicable the small words that they learn are in the right context. So, for example, being able to say, I'm wearing a red skirt on its own is really like seems quite unhelpful and not in the context. But if you think about it, we're talking about costumes in an opera house, costume department, which costume is yours, being able to describe what you wear. Suddenly it becomes super relevant for that learner. It becomes interesting. It's not just about, school uniform and whatever you learn at school, bringing all that vocab back. It's like about making it applicable to that student, coming from more of a perspective of immersion. So
Absolutely. I mean, costuming is huge, and you have to be able to. It's a very personal relationship, in my experience as a soloist, that you have with your costume designer and with your dresser. And in my experience, getting started working in Germany, a lot of the older generational women that are amazing seamstresses most often don't speak English. A lot of the younger generation do, so there's always usually someone that can help you. But I've worked with a handful of just women that are older that the English, it wasn't as an international world as it is today, where people have more access to English and the younger generation has more access to English, where you do have to be able to, if you want a certain costume to fit a certain way, you're going to have to articulate it in that costume fitting, which I imagine is probably a big part of your section for at least opera singers. I know you also teach musicians that are not singers, but
exactly, yeah. So it comes quite early on in the learning. So we're in, we're in our beginners course, and in beginners course, in A1 course, generally you could expect to find these, overarching themes of things like food, clothing, talking about holidays, talking about travel, all those kinds of things. But for me, it's about looking at, what you would expect to cover in a beginner's course and to find a musical singer application for each one. So we've just done 2 weeks of the past tense, perfect tense, in German, and we've gone through a variety of different scenarios. So 1 week, for example, in introduction, the first week we just come back from the summer, so we were talking about what did you do in the summer? Did you sing at a festival? Did you have any concerts? Did you have free time off? Talking about the importance of free time as a musician as well. And then we've just kind of gone one level deeper last week with this Haben or sein Hilfsverben in the perfect tense. So we've been doing all sorts of things. We were talking about Mahler's composing Hut in Austria, and the things that Mahler did around activities in the lake, and also things that he did that were sort of, it was basically about categorizing verbs from activities with movement for your sein, and then things that you do, like composing that are not involving movement and that kind of thing. So kind of getting that straight in people's heads. And then this week we're doing synopsis of operas in the tense. So we're looking at verbs. Again, we're still very early on. It's still a beginner's course, but we're looking at finding out how to formulate the past tense of new verbs. And tomorrow, actually, we're going to be looking at being able to say what happened first, then what's next.
What happens next, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it should be quite fun.
And since we are Oper Germany, our website, besides costume and auditions, and some like musical numbers, bar numbers, and things like that, are there any other topics that, if you work with an opera singer in particular, that you aim for to make sure they have a grasp on in their kind of total sessions with you?
Yeah, so again, it depends on the student. So the examples I was just giving there were from my beginners group course. So they are a group of actually mostly, I think 9 out of 10 are singers, and we have one accompanist in the course. But it's about for them, that's a very specific goal of building from 0 to 100, over a very long period of time, over an hour and a half each week. We're in week 23, 24 of being together as a group. So that's a kind of longer term goal. But if someone said to me and I was like, I need a crash course in things, I would sit down and normally what I do is we have a consultation on Zoom, 15 minutes, half an hour, and we go through and work out. Usually, again, it's in German. So we start off with the small talk and then how are you? What's your name? Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. And then we just build it. And then I would gain an assessment of that person's prior knowledge, or I would recommend doing a longer course perhaps.
Have you ever come across a student that's needed help in language with visa and contracts, like other subjects besides costume and bar numbers and kind of musical terms? I'm curious what other um, for singers in particular, kind of what vocabulary subjects you also work on.
Yes, so I was working alongside someone who's an agent, and they were asking very specifically for things like support with contracts, or CV writing is the other one that comes up all the time. So again, it depends on the student and their particular level, but I have three kind of crash courses like which can be delivered in one stint, which are CV writing, preparing for an audition, and musical terminology crash course. And those are kind of the three, like, sort of, we could get it down to an hour and a half, zoom through. But the thing is, it really depends on the student's goals. It's all well and good if you've got no background in German, say, I want to prep for an audition now. And there's only so much you can achieve in, if that student's got an hour's time between now and next week, how much can you achieve? But on the other hand, I've got students who have maybe done a B1 or B2 years and years ago, and they want a refresher, and we have maybe a session. And my goal would be then to reintroduce vocabulary in a way that's very empowering to them. So in a way that,
Do you cater to each student as far as what their needs
yeah,
are, and what
yeah,
what métier, what if they're a soloist or a chorister or a
exactly,
orchestral musician? Okay, yeah.
exactly. It's very specific to the student and the student's request.
In your
Um,
background as a soloist and a chorister, I mean, you're going to know what vocabulary they need to really focus on. So that's a huge asset that you have as a teacher, being also a musician as well.
I would hope so. I think, for me, I absolutely love working with musicians, and some of the students that I teach, I also work alongside with. So that's very lovely other connection. But I think that as a teacher, having empathy is a huge thing, and making someone feel comfortable in a second language, and especially, you can really fast track someone's learning if, by empowering them to have a go, or by putting them in a scenario where, I'm thinking of my group course at the moment. We've got a great group of singers who, meet up on Zoom for an hour and a half every week. And, it's really interesting because the issue is not speaking, which is lovely. I mean, in prior teaching, I've had lots of students who come to me and are like, I've done loads of book work and I've done loads of grammar drills, but I can't put the sentence together. And so it's actually really nice to be in a situation where, we are focusing on usage-based learning, essentially, immersive learning,
What
where
would you say? What would you say is the minimum amount of time that a singer, an American singer, especially somebody who has no experience with languages or little experience with languages, a couple of years in high school, maybe 3, 4 years in college, but that kind of experience, what would you say is the minimum that they need to do, or how can they measure themselves to be ready for auditions?
I think in terms of time, is that was that
Yes, it's both. It's both.
So I think to be able to do an audition in German, I think that if you were to do a specialized course for musicians and you were in an environment where you were focusing on speaking and usage based learning, I think that within a year you would have an extremely good basis of the language, extremely good foundations that you could then continue to build on.
Do you think that students should take the full year, or can they compress that and then learn as they are in Germany?
I mean, you can compress it, of course, when you're in Germany. From my perspective, depends on the person, uh,
Yes.
and it depends on their particular goals. But I think that there are two sides to language learning. One side is exposure. That's really important, and immersion. But the other side of it is called, like in training, you would call it Sensibilisierung. So it's like sensitization for the language. So a really good example I can give you is Duolingo, which I think is a super resource. But I think that where Duolingo becomes super, super powerful is when you support it with focused like learning and directed study from someone. So where a teacher is enabling you to be able to be the analyst of, why is the owl asking me to do this? You're not just focusing on the gaming, you're focusing on
Well, now,
Content.
very interesting point. What would you suggest that for young singers who, are tight on money, and, want to, what would you suggest that they combine with lessons to best accelerate the process?
So I really am a big believer that I mean, I offer group and one-to-one teaching. And for me, there is a huge benefit to group learning, which is far more cost effective for the student. But you are increasing your exposure to the language and you're being linked up with a community of like-minded learners with whom you can practice outside of the lesson. So I think that's a really good investment. It's not just to spend your money on one-to-one lessons all the time. I think group lessons are super, super powerful and it gets you exposed to, because come on, in the industry, it's so international. A lot of the people that you interact with will be second language speakers. And I think that you need to get used to hearing lots of second language speakers speak German and get used to trying to identify what is being said or what they are aiming to express. So I think that's one way that you can kind of cut the cost, but also benefit yourself. Um, and then I would say Duolingo is great. Just don't rely on it as a gaming thing. Don't just do it to keep the owl happy or to like keep the streak. Like do it as fast as possible. That's the big thing. Like do it mindfully. Do it, whilst reflecting about, why. Okay, why are they asking me to put this sentence together in this order? Why are they asking me this vocab? I think if you do it analytically, there's a real benefit to it. And then the other thing for musicians, especially, is to train your oral perception of the language, because I think it's probably fair to say, your listening skills and your speaking skills are going to be your most useful. Obviously, reading and writing is very, very useful as well. But I think that it's the oral perception that's really, really important. What's someone saying to me at a fast pace in a rehearsal? What do I need to be able to come back with? So things like listening to arts-based podcasts are quite helpful if you're more advanced. I personally really like NDR Kultur, which is great. They have loads of different things. They have podcasts of short bedtime stories, which are quite lovely from new publications. They have kind of desert island disc vibe interviews with famous singers who tell you what their leader recommendations are, and that's the thing, is that's the vocab that you're going to need. So I think that can be really, really helpful if
And
you're.
for young singers, NDR is Norddeutscher Rundfunk. It's a radio, but I assume that you can you hear the podcasts these days. You can get their podcast on any of the standard podcast forms.
Yeah, they've got an app called NDR Kultur you can just download, and it's available worldwide as well, which is super great because you can listen to it if you haven't moved to
Well,
Germany.
that's a great suggestion, because we there are many apps, and there's Deutsche Welle and all these things, but
That's great as well. Yeah, that's super great. I mean, the Deutsche Welle, the langsam gesprochene Nachrichten are great. The slowly spoken news, I would really recommend that. Because that's the ultimate oral listening test. So it's if you're a beginner as well, it's speaking about lots of different topics. It's the news headlines in maybe like 3 minutes of very slow German.
Right, right.
And
Sehr langsam.
it has a transcript as well. So you can kind of test yourself a bit. You can listen to it once and then you can go back and then you can help yourself a bit by reading the transcript. And then the other thing I would recommend, which I think is quite popular with my students, is a Google Chrome plug-in for Netflix, which
Uh-huh.
is called Language Learning with Netflix. And you can watch your German TV series if you're into that on Netflix with not just one set of subtitles in English. You can also have English and German, which is
In
super fun.
German.
And then the best thing about it is you can pause it and click on a word and it gives you a description. So that's called Language Learning with Netflix, and it's a Chrome download you can add in it. You can add it to your Netflix, which is quite fun.
That's
And
amazing.
that's a Google app.
Yeah, that's Google Chrome, and if you Google it, you can add it to this. I can't remember how I did it. It's quite easy. Just download it, and then it magically appears on your
On
Netflix.
the
And
I'll
screen.
make sure we have a link to that in our description in the YouTube of this interview
yeah,
for sure. All these tools, absolutely.
Excellent.
And to kind of tail onto your enthusiasm for oral learning. I mean, that was the biggest thing when I came to Europe was I increased more of that, not only with just being in the country, of course, but an app that I love is the Pimsleur app.
I don't know who is that.
Which is it's a little bit more. It used to be really expensive, where you had to kind of invest, I think, $400 or $500 just on one language. But over the years, they've gotten a little bit more wise to offering a better package for people. And right now, I think it's $20 a month. It's a little more expensive than your, $1.99 app. But if you're learning multiple languages or keeping up on them, it gives you access to their entire library, $20 a month, and it's half-hour segments, and it's all by oral. It goes in the speed of kind of trying to mimic a real conversation. So it'll ask you to say something in the language and only give you a certain amount of time. So it kind of tries to flex that muscle of like thinking fast on your feet, which is really what is a make or break type of.
It's really interesting you say that because when we're looking at like what makes a successful language learner, there's like two things, and what neither of them are language like aptitude or like some kind of like inborn skill of learning language. And you have to remember that musicians are great listeners. They've got great oral skills. We're used to listening. The two things are actually motivation. So if you know that you're coming to Germany to do a contract, that's a really good motivator. And then the other thing is actually being able to it's not the question of like having this magic set of vocab like that there's every single word and you can kind of scan through and remember what the word is that you need, like I don't know, for example, hoover, really weird word. It's the skill of being able to put together a sentence describing what you need, or it's that like agile thinking that you're talking about. So being able to say that thing which I use to clean the house sometimes, it's a really vague thing, and then the person you're speaking to will come back with, do you mean a hoover? And then you've learned the word. So, and then it's in the context as well. So it's those two. I think that's really important to remember, is like you don't have to be a genius to learn a second language. It's those things: motivation, and it's the agile thinking and creativity. And singers, I would argue, are great listeners and usually quite creative people. So
good. You have to be good in improvising, yeah, which is something we
definitely.
learn. We learn on the stage, and we can apply to language learning. Indeed,
And
and
there's
Pimsleur
and
is a
there's
great app
nothing
for
like
that.
and there's nothing like having egg on your face to motivate you. So, so
Yeah, I've made so many mistakes and said wrong things. And I've always found to like all to say this to all singers, like I've had very good experience. I live in France now, so I'm mostly focusing on French. But in Germany, I found everyone pretty helpful. Like they were always willing to
Yeah.
kind of, like you said, complete your sentence or if you're making an effort. And Larry, I think you've always said this too. The native speakers will appreciate that you're making an effort to speak.
It makes a huge difference. It really does. In turn, not just you're learning the language, but you're speaking it to other people who really appreciate hearing their own language, spoken by foreigners. It's a sign of respect, actually.
Mm,
You
yeah, I think that's true. And there's also something quite liberating about knowing that you're not there to be examined on your language. Like you may be working towards a qualification in the long-term goal, perhaps, but actually, in your day-to-day basis, it's not a test. You can use the English word, you can fill in the gap for yourself, just keep speaking. If you can't remember that one obscure word, say it in your own language, someone will help you, you
right.
know?
In
Yeah,
the end, you are communicating you're trying to communicate with people.
exactly. Yeah.
What do you see as the future for Lorna Price now?
Well, I'm really enjoying keeping this balance of freelance. Well, I'm a complete freelancer, so I have to say over what work I do. So I'm moving to Paris for 3 months from December to do an opera there, which will be super fun. But the nice thing for me is that I am able to keep my teaching during that time because it comes with me on my computer, which is great. So I really enjoy the language coaching work, and I'd like to keep the balance for as long as possible. And also because for me, I'm a German second language speaker, and really enjoy flexing those muscles, and I enjoy the creativity of coming up with um, new ways to combine, yeah, the grammar points, of more advanced German with a specific situation. Like, for example, in Salzburg, I was writing a lesson for my group course, which was about prepositions and about being able to say where something is in a house or in an opera house or in a room. Like where is the pencil is on the music stand, that kind of thing. Or where are the dressing rooms? They're on the third floor, that kind of thing. And so that was really, really fun to actually be in Salzburg writing that lesson at the time. Because, when I'm at home and I'm sort of thinking like, okay, yeah, so what vocab do we need? Okay, we need to be able to say like Schneiderei, and we need to be able to say like dressing rooms and all these sorts of things. But it was so fun to be able to be there living that situation and being able to like, it sounds really silly, but just like walk into the lift and like take a picture of the lift, and that's like, oh, okay, well, there's all the vocab for this is what we need, like this is what the usage is. So for me, the goal is to keep singing, and I'm really enjoying, my focus is on mostly early music. So I am really excited for the next few months of touring. Got some nice projects happening, and yeah, looking forward to
Where
doing.
where will where will you be touring?
So I'm about to go to Belgium in a couple of weeks, which would be fun for a Belgian tour. And then I've got some UK based bits and bobs all over, going to Oxford, and then up to Ely, and then a couple of concerts in London with an early music group I work with. And then bits and bobs before moving to Paris in December for a few months for this Rameau opera, which will be super fun. So yeah, bits and bobs really.
Is that all with the Monteverdi ensemble?
Um, so the tour, yeah, the UK tour is with Monteverdi, and then I work with a Belgian group called Collegium Vocali Ghent, uh,
Hmm.
Belgium, and then the Rameau opera is with Utopia Chorus, which is a new chorus that's been formed of all different European singers from all over.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah, simple.
Cool.
And if I have a few just like kind of rapid fire questions for you. Biggest mistake English speaking musicians make starting to learn German?
Oh, as in general mistake or language mistake?
General kind of approach. Like if someone comes to you and they really, maybe tried to learn it for 6 months to a year, where do you try and steer them? What are the kind of the common mistakes maybe you see with musicians learning German?
I get so many emails that are like, "Ah, yeah, so I've done 2 years of Duolingo, so I'm not a beginner." And then they come to a lesson and it's, can we put a sentence together? So
Right.
focus on
And
your
you can't even
speaking.
speak.
Yeah, focus on the usage. Don't focus on the gaming. Focus on the usage of the language, like speaking, production. Um, yeah.
Cool. What's fun for you about learning German?
Oh, lots of things. I think, well, aside from it opening up lots of beautiful, being able to send lots of beautiful translations of Lieder and opera, I think it's a really creative language. And when you get to a certain point with it, you realize how it's this discovery of the language and how flexible it is and how creative you can be with sticking together different words or with word order. There's a weird like satisfaction about like conjugating a very complicated sentence and then remembering that the verb comes at the end and remembering it's there, you're saving it, and then you say it and you're like, ah, excellent. It's very satisfying language, but also very creative language and not as rigid as you think it might be with all the crazy grammar.
And this leads to my next question. The biggest difference you try to emphasize between the spoken language and the sung language. Biggest
Ooh.
differences.
As in, oh, well, this is quite fun. So I can give you a good example of Bach, for example. So when my beginner course were learning the present tense verbs, they would always put in extra syllables because they're used to singing those extra syllables. So, for example, like wachet rather than wacht. And that was a really interesting thing for me to discover as a language teacher, was how these like previous forms of a particular tense or how, sung German then started infiltrating into spoken German. So, yeah.
The archaic, in other words, archaic speech
Yes, exactly. So,
that, that, that you learn as a singer, right? Right, in all languages,
yeah.
whether it's Italian or
Yeah, and it was really funny because I think one of the first warm-ups that maybe it was like maybe lesson 4 or 5, we were doing letters of the alphabet and the phonetic alphabet. So, in rehearsals it would be like we're going from rehearsal marking A, it'll be like begin von Anton or something like that. We were talking about this alphabet and how it works. And there's a warm-up and we having had like 4 lessons of German, we'd hit an A to Z of the German language. And I was thinking like, okay, right, they've got some good vocab under their belts now, like four lessons, they'd probably, be able to get 26 words. And the words that some of the things are coming up with are amazing, like really unusual words from like XYZ Bach cantata. It was
right.
really, really funny and really, really, really strange, archaic language that you would barely use now. And it's just, I don't know, it's quite fun to see how much is stored, is stored there.
Right.
Well, Lorna, thank you so much for joining us today and for giving your perspective on kind of the general difference in cultures and how language is approached. And I think it's really something that a lot of North American singers. I can't speak for the UK, but we primarily, our audience is North American singers. It's such a different ball game, language learning over there. And it really is kind of a shift in concept of how to learn. And I think when you do learn a difference of the system of how language kind of is taught in Europe versus North America, there can be a lot of tools that can make the process of really getting those pragmatic skills you need in German to go towards your goals of auditioning or of doing Sprechstimme, whatever opera you're doing that might have spoken dialogue. And your perspective is really I think, interesting coming from your study of language in school and also your work as a musician. So it's really, thank you so much. It's going to be helpful for our audience to hear your perspective.
Pleasure. No, thank you for having me. It's been really lovely to chat and also have some people who will listen to me bang on about how great learning German is. So thanks.
It's terrifically important because anybody who works here and makes a life here will have to learn to speak the language.
Mhm.
And one of the best ways to actually impress people in auditions is to actually speak the language to them. So we thank you, and I love your approaches, and it sounds like it combines speaking the language with music, and that's a great thing. In the end, that's what we have to do.
And if people want to reach out to get your services, can you give us all your information? We'll
Yes,
put it in the description in the
give us
bio.
your
Oh, yeah.
wwws and all those kinds of things and your
Yeah.
emails.
Of course, and I know I will say if you know for people in North America, I've got students here in North America, two students in North America at the moment. I know that my time zone doesn't quite fit at the moment with your time zone because we do our group lessons in the morning if the group lessons are something you're interested in. And I've got in the back of my mind of having a new beginner North American class of a time zone that will work for you guys, probably most likely like your morning, but my afternoon, if that makes sense. So please reach out. Like don't be deterred by the times at the moment. You know, as I say, it's kind of based on demand. So yeah, just drop me an email and I'll always get back to you and we can have a chat on Zoom before you book any lessons.
Okay, what are your emails and what are your contact?
So it's really easy. So my website is I'll send it to you. It's www.germanformusicians.co.uk. And then my email address is germanformusicians@gmail.com, all one word, lowercase. So
Okay,
nice and easy. Yeah,
great. That's the way we like it. Uh,
yeah. That's
uh,
that's what it says on the thing.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you. Best of luck with both careers, with singing and teaching, and we will hear you. Heather is in France and I'm in Berlin, so we're all pretty close. But for those folks in North America, remember too that the time change is slightly different when you go in the United States, when we go off of daylight savings time, and Europe is England is the UK is 5 hours from the East Coast, but there's a couple of weeks when it doesn't work that way. So just check it out and be careful, and check out her sites.
Thank you.
Vielen, vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank.
Ciao, tschüss.
Tschüss.